Hi, I'm talking with Anthony Nicolau, the director of Corners and also the co-writer. Hi, Anthony.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing well, doing well.
Okay. So we're just going to dive right in. Um, so in this film, just, as I was watching it and I'm thinking about your cast, you have the late, great Lynn Cohen, who's been in a couple of our festival films, and she came out to a festival once. And, Lynn's a character, and she's been directed by Steven Spielberg, Woody Allen, a bunch of other people. And then you have Ada Turturro, who's been in a ton of films, and she's been directed by Martin Scorsese, and she's been with a lot of big name stars. And then the film is starring Catherine Keen, who wrote the original story this is based on, and you're getting to direct her and tell her how to play the role she wrote. So I guess my first question for you is, are you crazy? Because it just seems like, wow, that's just a lot on your plate. How was all of that kind of combined together for you? How were Lynn and Ada, and how was that experience for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very interesting experience for me as a filmmaker and a director because I mean I've worked with a lot of talented actors in the past, but generally not as many that have such a high regard as Lynn Cohen or Ada Turturro, or at least have worked on projects that I aspired to be making at some point in my career. And so it was a very interesting experience for me to figure out how am I actually directing each of these people. And Catherine, I had worked with once before on another film I had made. I cast her in a supporting character, and we had stayed in touch. And she had this idea based on her own personal experience dealing with her mother and taking her into her own home. So she had sent me this script that she had been writing, and I connected with it and I really liked it. So me and my writing partner, Andy Cable, kind of took it and reworked it into a framework because I mean, Catherine, she's an aspiring filmmaker and writer and producer, but I think her heart really is in performing and acting. So she felt very comfortable, especially since we had a relationship, allowing me to, or me and my writing partner, to take this project and sort of make it our own, but keep in the general themes that I know she was wanting to express so that she can actually connect from a deeper place with the project. And it was interesting because I was able to work with her initially, and it seemed like each piece sort of started lining up. Eventually, we were able to bring Aida Turturro on, and then we were able to bring in Lynn Cohen. And it was most interestingly how different each of their processes were. Catherine, being sort of a younger actor in the craft, she's very interested in being very technical about how to approach things. Not that there isn't a sort of genuine emotional pull for her that she's utilizing, but she very much wants to talk performing craft and how are we getting to this place, and let's use this language together so that we can explore this character and this concept and this growth. Aida, on the other hand, I imagine having such a long television career, was very interested in just keeping it fresh and just
Mm.
getting out there and just performing and getting the performance out on the page. She wasn't as interested in, the long, lengthy, let's really explore the caverns of this character, because I think she came from a background where it's like, let's keep this on the tip of our tongue and let's just get it out there. Whereas Lynn almost felt like there was something sort of magical about the way that she would treat you as a director,
Mm.
and it in result made you treat her a certain way. I think there was such a strong kindness to her that she really wanted to sort of hear what you wanted first, and once she knew that, she had a lot to say, which at the time I can't recall exactly how old she was when I was working with her, but I know it was at least she was at least in her mid 80s at the time.
Mhm.
And when she walked in, it was just sort of like, a 25-year-old woman walking in. I mean, a little bit slower than a 25-year-old woman, but just sharp and ready to really put in the work and hear what you had to say. So it was, I mean, an interesting process all in all, but very gratifying.
Yeah, I met her briefly at the festival, and I talked to, I'm talking about Len Cohen.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
talked to one of the other directors that she's worked with, and she's immediately very sharp, obviously.
Oh, absolutely.
And the impression I got from the other director I dealt with is she's also she has no problem telling you what she thinks about something. If she doesn't like something, she'll tell you, "No, I don't like that," or pretty
Well, and
direct.
that's sort of what I loved about working with her also, because I really I mean, the way I've been starting to try and direct is by doing it as little as possible
Mhm.
and just talking with these actors as much as possible beforehand about these characters and what they're going to, so that when I'm on set, I don't have to do, the film school, like, do this as if, you're swimming in a vat of peanut butter, like that sort of 101 bullshit. And and she was very, very interested in talking beforehand multiple times, and she had, exactly like you were saying, she just had a lot to say, which I imagine is just pulling from decades of just life experience at the end of the day.
So I also wanted to ask you. So this was this shot in Manhattan?
It was, yeah.
Okay. So did the outdoor shots? Were you doing this kind of on the fly? Did you get permissions?
Right.
How did this work out for you?
um, I work professionally as a commercial producer and director, and I'm very accustomed to the idea of having to get permits and licensing to use certain areas. And we definitely didn't do that for any of this film. And it's obviously, I mean, coming from a commercial world, or at least the thing that, pays the bills, it was, of course, a discussion, but, this is independent filmmaking, and we were sort of trying to scrap together as much as we could. So the idea of having to really permit a subway stop on the Upper East Side, or shut down streets, it was just so far outside of what we would have been able to do. And to that point, the general sort of frenetic aesthetic of this film
Mhm.
sort of lended itself to just stealing it.
I was wondering. I mean, you can tell you're in Manhattan,
Yeah.
or you're pretty sure you're in Manhattan. But I also noticed it's like you're not quite sure which subway stop is this. What street am I on? And then there's that sequence where everything's going by very quickly. Which the first time I was just thinking of the emotional aspect of the film, and I think the third time I saw it is like, hey, he doesn't have to have permission for any of these shots because no one knows they're in them.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. That was definitely part of it. Was just, I mean, when we were very strategic on like the streets that we chose and the time of day that we chose to shoot, and trying not to just be surrounded by people if possible. I mean, also trying to avoid, any NYPD when we didn't need to have them involved in the scenario. But yep, it was pretty run and gun for those.
And there was something you said earlier I remembered I wanted to ask about. The whole thing about the decision whether or not to put your older parent in a facility, I think feels very different right now with COVID-19 and what's been happening in those facilities
Yep.
than it felt when it's not the same conversation as when these films were made that were addressing some of those issues. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's actually, it's very interesting that the conversation of whether you should put your mother in a home or you should take her in yourself, which I don't think the idea of taking your mother into your own home is a very it's not a very strong American ideal. This is, I mean, I think we see this in a lot of other cultures, especially Eastern cultures and some European cultures, but in the United States, it's, and obviously this is not across the board, but it's more common to put your parents in an assisted living center, and I think a lot of the times it's mutual to some extent. But my mother actually works at a nursing home, and she's been working through the COVID pandemic and the chaos that sort of come about with that. And, you know, speaking earlier to this idea of my mother wanting to possibly bring her mother to live with her while working at a nursing home, I think has only reinforced and strengthened the idea that it probably just makes more sense to have your loved ones close to you. But once again, I mean, I think there is sort of a trepidation and a reticence to it because it is the fear of the unknown. It's I lived the last time she lived with her mother was, you know, when she was a teenager, and the role was completely reversed. So it's how psychologically and emotionally is she going to be able to actually handle the day-to-day presence of her mother in her home? One would think, you know, well, it won't be a problem. It's my mother, but I think, you know, the actual situation is much different than the imagined to some extent.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about the original music for the film. The piano and strings
Yeah.
had kind of their pseudo classical sound, but also had a real New York energy to it, almost like a nervousness or something
Mhm.
to it. Tell me about your composers for this.
Yeah, absolutely. This was another moment, sort of like working with Aida or Lynn, where I was a big fan of Claire and Olivier Manchon, who the composers are, for probably 15 years, but absolutely no connection to them. Olivier Manchon has worked, you know, he's worked with a lot of different people that I think he's worked with Sufjan Stevens and done some orchestrations and a various other folks in that sort of indie world. And Claire Manchon had a band, Claire and the Reasons, who actually, back when I was in college, I saw them with a number of other bands. And I've just liked them for years. Olivier Manchon has recorded contemporary classical music for a number of years now, and I've kept up with them. But I just decided at some point to randomly reach out to them and send them a rough cut of the film, and more or less sort of write, you know, a love letter, as in I love your music and I think it'd be a really great fit for this project. They luckily resonated with the project. They really liked it. And they, I guess, had been transitioning into composing music for documentaries and commercials, and also wanting sort of it was sort of a dual situation where they were wanting more experience doing scripted narrative, and I obviously wanted to work with them, so it sort of became a symbiotic fit to some extent, and they were willing to do this for, you know, let's just say much less than they would have charged somebody who wasn't doing this as a passion project.
Yeah, and it really worked well with the. I mean, you have the string quartet music in the background in the apartment, and it just fit very well. There was a nice, easy transition from hearing that music to hearing the original music they did, which I really appreciate in a short form. Sorry, in a short film format. That was hard to say,
Well, it
because
was that's
often it's much more jarring. You
yeah,
know.
that's kind of an interesting point, because Olivier, when I sent the rough cut, I had the music inside the house that I knew would have been playing from the radio already in there. And he knew exactly what the pieces were and who the composer was. And I think that was a really great way for him to create a sort of connective tissue between the interior and the exterior world. But that wasn't even my direction. That was just him knowing his stuff.
Yeah, you really you did well with the actors you got and the composers you got. This was
Oh, thank you.
a great project for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I'm really proud of it. You know, the past films that I've made, I think have been sort of leading me to this place to some extent. I mean, I I always I always try and obviously grow as a filmmaker, but for me, most importantly, it's creating moments and performances that feel authentic and can resonate a deeper concept that you're trying to get across. And I think I've gotten closer to that with this film. And I think it's in large part due to working with talented people. And you know, whenever I'm talking with colleagues or even younger folks that are talking about filmmaking, and they ask, you know, like, oh, how did you get those performances? I often will respond, I really didn't. I just worked with really good people, which is sort of half the battle. I almost think I almost think you can throw a lot of technique out the window if you're just working with people that know how to do what they need to do. To some
Absolutely. We see that all the time that, you know, Alan often said, Alan Ingalls often said that the film is as good as the weakest link. Whoever the weakest actor in the film is, that's how good the
100%.
film
And
is.
nowadays, one bad performance will turn an audience off like instantly. So it's
Right.
something I'm very, very critical of.
All right. And just one last
Yeah,
question. This is not a question I usually ask, but this is a question that the audience often asks, and I'm sure you get this one. As I personally am a big fan of the film ends when you're done telling the story, and you don't try to tie things up. This one really does that. You really just get to that point and you decide this is a story I wanted to tell.
yeah.
Um, we can't even really hear what the phone call she's getting is saying. Was that debated much? How you wanted to end that, or did you just always know this is where we want to end this?
It it was definitely debated quite a bit. It was written hearing what the person was saying, but the idea that eventually you sort of float off and you don't fully understand where the story ends. I mean, we certainly didn't want to end with they found the mother, they didn't find the mother. I like the idea of when you watch a film, and I'm not always a fan of these sort of art house open endings, but I am often a fan of an open ending when there are decisions you can make as a viewer. You can either decide that that
Mhm.
was about this, or you can decide it was about that. And I
Mhm.
found that even people that I've shown the film with have one of three responses: either frustration, or they think they found the mother, that's what this is about, or they haven't found the mother, and that's what this is about. And I guess this in particular seemed like the right fit to just because we have the audio, we could have just played it and let people hear exactly what's going on. But it just felt more natural to go that route so that people could make an emotional decision. And it was debated quite a bit because obviously my co-writer, who's also a producer on this project, Catherine, who starred and was the impetus for the story, also helped produce. So there were cooks in the kitchen, but we all at least came to a pretty common ground with, all right, I think this is the way to end it. Whether it's the right way or not, I don't know. I mean, that's I I oscillate with that question. I don't know.
Yeah. As long as you keep changing your mind back and forth, you're probably in the right place.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So look, I really appreciate your time. I'm glad the weather held out for us.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I hope we get to have you out to our festival in person someday.
Yeah, congratulations on putting it on. I look forward to watching as much as I can as the festival trucks along this autumn.
Okay, well, we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.